So when you look at a medical diagnosis, there is this fundamental expectation of precision.
Right.
Uh,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's usually a very binary thing.
exactly. Like if you take an X-ray of a shattered femur, the imaging shows that jagged white line right across the bone.
Right. The pathology is completely visible.
Yeah, and the orthopedic surgeon just points to the screen and says, there's the fracture. That is the exact point of failure.
It's comforting because the physical reality dictates the response. You don't have the radiology department arguing with the ER about whether the bone is actually broken.
Right. But if you try to transition that expectation of diagnostic precision over into the realm of global supply chains or industrial logistics, that X-ray machine is just entirely useless.
Oh, completely useless. The landscape is structurally opaque.
It really is. I mean, when a 3 million square foot factory floor just grinds to a halt, or 500 tons of raw steel literally vanish between a dock and a manufacturing bay, you almost never see a clean diagnostic response.
No, what you see is a masterclass in deflection.
Yeah, C-suite executives go on these financial news networks, and they just point to massive nebulous forces.
Right. They blame macroeconomic headwinds, or they cite geopolitical black swan events.
Exactly. They talk about global inflationary pressures, but they never point to their own internal systems.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, the cognitive dissonance at the executive level is just staggering sometimes.
Because it's infinitely more palatable for a chief operating officer to blame the closure of a canal halfway across the world, right?
Exactly. It's so much easier than admitting there is a fundamental catastrophic failure in their own internal data architecture. The macroeconomic excuse is just the ultimate shield for internal logistical incompetence.
And that deflection is exactly what we are stripping away today in this deep dive. We are taking a hammer to the opacity of modern industrial logistics.
Which is incredibly necessary for you, the listener, whether you're a student of supply chain management or a professional dealing with this chaos daily.
Definitely. And we are doing this through an incredibly specific, almost radical lens today.
We're bringing in Dieter Rams.
Yes, we are taking the legendary industrial design philosophy of Dieter Rams, the godfather of minimalism.
The mind behind the functional elegance of 20th century Braun electronics.
Right, the man whose entire ethos is defined by that uncompromising phrase, less but better. And we are aggressively applying his principles of essentialism and functional clarity to this sprawling heavy metal reality of supply chain management.
The collision of those two worlds is exactly what makes the source material we're looking at today so potent. Ram's philosophy is deeply misunderstood by a lot of people.
Yeah, they conflate his minimalism with just visual aesthetics.
Exactly. They think it just means a product looks clean or, it doesn't have a lot of buttons.
But if you actually read his 10 principles of good design, the core tenet is that good design makes a product understandable.
Right. It strips away the non-essential to reveal the core function.
So when you apply that to a multi-billion-dollar supply chain, you aren't trying to make the warehouse look prettier.
No, not at all. You are trying to strip away the bloated software layers and those Byzantine management structures. You want to reveal the actual unvarnished physical flow of material.
Oh, but to really ground this for you, we can't just operate in the realm of high-minded design theory. We need a laboratory.
We need a physical space where this collision of static design and dynamic reality is currently playing out at scale.
And Prasad Bandey's analytical work in our sources gives us the perfect real-world proving ground. We're looking at Pimpri Chinchwad, or PCMC.
The Detroit of the East.
Exactly. It's a colossal industrial twin city located in Pune, in Maharashtra, India. And it is perhaps one of the most intense concentrations of heavy manufacturing on the planet.
It's just the ultimate pressure cooker for logistics. I mean, if you can diagnose and solve a structural supply chain bottleneck in Pimpri Chinchwad, you can basically solve it anywhere.
Because we are looking at an ecosystem that was engineered from the ground up for a very specific era of industrialization.
Right, and it is now completely buckling under the weight of modern economic velocity.
So before we dissect the failures, we really have to understand the sheer, undeniable gravity of this laboratory. The genesis of Pimpri Chinchwad didn't follow the typical slow-burn growth of a standard city.
No, it was a deliberate, almost surgical insertion of state-sponsored heavy industry.
Right. If we roll the clock back to the era right after Indian independence, Pimpri and Chinchwad were essentially independent rural agricultural settlements.
Yeah, they sat on the outskirts of Pune, flanked by the Pavana River, but they had absolutely zero industrial footprint.
The defining catalyst was 1954. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, acting with the World Health Organization and UNICEF, established Hindustan Antibiotics right there in Pimpri.
Which was a monumental mandate. They had to manufacture and distribute affordable drugs for a newly independent nation of hundreds of millions of people.
Just pause and consider the logistical nightmare of that mandate in 1954.
Oh, it's wild. You are talking about the mass production and cold chain distribution of volatile pharmaceutical compounds.
In a country whose infrastructure was highly fragmented at that point,
Yeah.
you couldn't just rely on existing commercial networks.
Right. You literally had to terraform the environment to support the industry.
Exactly. Hindustan Antibiotics wasn't just a factory. It was this massive gravitational anomaly.
Because once you anchor a facility of that magnitude, you require absolute infrastructural certainty. You need guaranteed baseload power.
And massive volumes of purified water.
Right. And roadways capable of handling relentless heavy freight.
So that initial requirement forced the hand of the state. In 1962, the Maharashtra Industrial Development Corporation, the MIDC, stepped in and executed these massive land acquisitions.
They didn't just zone the land. They engineered a bespoke industrial foundation.
And that foundation became an irresistible magnet. If you look at the tenant list of the MIDC estates in PCMC, it's a who's who of heavy engineering.
Tata Motors, Bajaj Auto, Mercedes-Benz, Forbes Marshall.
ThyssenKrupp, these are not agile, asset-light tech startups. These are heavy metal behemoths that measure their daily throughput in thousands of tons of steel.
And millions of dollars in finished goods.
Right. So to support them, the MIDC engineered a highly specific, aggressively rigid physical network. We were talking about a dedicated draw of 144 million liters of water per day.
From the Pavana River alone.
Yeah. And there's a dedicated 400 kV power substation situated in Bosari to prevent brownouts. Plus, they laid down over 80 kilometers of specialized asphalted internal roads.
Roads engineered specifically for the turning radii and axle weights of multi-ton freight containers.
Exactly. That infrastructure is the architectural embodiment of 1960s supply chain theory.
It's designed for one thing: linear, predictable, unyielding flow.
Right. The whole urban plan is essentially an extrusion process. Raw materials enter through a designated artery, they get absorbed into the manufacturing campuses, value is added, and finished vehicles roll out through another artery.
It is highly optimized for scale, but it is fundamentally irreversibly rigid.
Which brings us to the collision, because that architecture was brilliant for the era of push manufacturing, where you built 10,000 cars and then figured out how to sell them later.
But the global economy shifted to a dynamic, demand-driven model.
And the static design of PCMC just slammed into the volatile reality of the 21st century.
The data here from the sources is just staggering. Between 2001 and 2017, the human population of this twin city grew by roughly 90%.
Surging past 1.7 million residents.
Yeah. But in that exact same 16-year window, the vehicular traffic, the sheer volume of logistical and civilian movement exploded by 700%.
A 700% increase in kinetic movement within a physical space that cannot dynamically expand.
That is the physical manifestation of a static design buckling under dynamic modern demands. The original architects of the MIBC estates could never have modeled the volatility we see today.
No, they definitely didn't model for e-commerce micro-fulfillment.
Or globalized just-in-time manufacturing, where a supplier in Taiwan dictates the daily production schedule of an assembly line in Pune.
Right. They built a system of rigid pipes, and we are trying to force a fire hose of unpredictable liquid through it.
And the pipes are bursting. You can literally see the structural failure bleeding into the environment.
Yeah, the city is generating approximately 290 million liters of raw sewage every single day, yet the civic infrastructure only has the capacity to treat 240 million liters.
That leaves a 50 million liter daily deficit of untreated overflow.
Which is choking the Pavana and Indriani rivers. We are seeing massive blooms of water hyacinths suffocating the waterways.
Which is a direct biological indicator of systemic infrastructural failure.
Absolutely. And the old Pune-Mumbai highway is routinely paralyzed by that 700% traffic surge. It is an undeniable example of a physical network drowning under logistical weight.
But here is the critical pivot for you, especially if you are serious about supply chain architecture. The traffic jams, the trucks idling, the polluted rivers, Those are the highly visible symptoms.
Right. Those are the things politicians talk about.
But if you are an operations director or a logistics engineering student, those visible failures are not what should terrify you.
Because the most destructive traffic jams in Pimpri-Chinchwad are entirely invisible.
Exactly. They aren't happening on the asphalt. They are happening in the servers.
In the organizational charts?
And in the psychological incentives of the executives running the factories.
Which perfectly transitions our analysis from the civic infrastructure to the corporate architecture. Bond's analytical framework identifies 7 hidden supply chain bottlenecks.
And we need to evaluate the internal operations of these giants against these 7 failure points. It's a diagnostic curriculum that applies everywhere.
Whether you are running a stamping plant in Pune or a semiconductor fab in Shenzhen.
Right, or an automotive line in Detroit. The first 2 bottlenecks are deeply intertwined, and they originate entirely in the C-suite.
Treating the supply chain as a cost center and the subsequent over-reliance on static historical forecasting.
Let's really dissect the psychology of that. For decades, the dominant corporate philosophy was that the supply chain was merely a utility.
Like the electricity bill.
Yeah.
Just a necessary expense to be aggressively minimized.
Exactly. It was rarely viewed as a strategic engine for competitive advantage. And when the board views logistics purely as a line item expense, it creates a toxic incentive structure for procurement teams.
So think about a mid-level procurement director at a massive heavy engineering firm in PCMC. How is their performance actually evaluated?
It is almost never tied to the overall agility of the company or the efficient utilization of warehouse space.
No, it is tied to one metric, reducing the unit cost of raw materials. Price per ton. That's the only metric that matters to them.
Right. So what behavior does that metric incentivize? It incentivizes the procurement director to rely on static historical forecasting to justify massive localized purchases.
So they will look at a 3-month-old spreadsheet, see that a steel mill is offering a volume discount if they buy 10,000 tons instead of 2,000, and they pull the trigger.
They just save the company pennies per unit on paper. They hit their KPI, they get their bonus.
But they completely ignored the real-time macroeconomic shifts.
And they ignored the cost of capital tied up in that inventory.
And most importantly, they ignored the physical reality of the factory floor. They just triggered a massive physical bottleneck down the line.
Exactly. They optimized a localized financial metric at the expense of global systemic flow. So those 10,000 tons of steel arrive at the PCMC facility.
Right. And the warehouse wasn't modeled for that influx.
So the receiving docks get jammed, trucks are backed up onto the internal MIDC roads.
Contributing to that massive traffic spike again.
Yeah. And the excess steel is stored in overflow yards, exposing it to degradation. They saved money on a spreadsheet, but they crippled the kinetic flow of the factory.
And that systemic blindness is what drives us into the most fascinating failures in this entire framework, Bottleneck 3 and Bottleneck 5.
Fragmented ownership and limited visibility.
Right. In the context of our laboratory, this is what Bond terms the Pimpri-Chinchwad fracture. And this is where the medical X-ray analogy from our introduction just completely falls apart.
The Pimpri-Chinchwad fracture is basically the core pathology of modern logistics. It's the phenomenon where different departments within the exact same organization are operating in total deliberate isolation.
Connected only by fractured, latent data pipelines.
Right. Bond paints a painfully realistic scenario to illustrate this. So imagine a massive automotive parts manufacturer right in the heart of the Busari industrial zone.
Okay, so you have the procurement team who, like we just said, optimized for unit cost and bought a mountain of raw materials based on obsolete data.
And down the hall, operating in an entirely different operational silo, is the vice president of sales.
Who has an entirely different, highly aggressive incentive structure. They're staring down the barrel of a quarterly revenue target mandated by the board.
Right. So the VP of sales is on the phone with a major automotive client. The client needs a massive shipment of finished components by the end of the month.
And the VP of sales, desperate to close the quarter strong, pulls up their executive dashboard.
The dashboard says the raw materials are in stock and the production lines have capacity.
So they promise immediate delivery, they sign the contract, ring the bell.
Procurement thinks they are heroes for saving money. Sales thinks they are heroes for closing the deal.
They're both operating under the illusion of perfect data.
But the physical reality is entirely divorced from their digital illusions. And who absorbs the shock of this disconnect?
The warehouse manager.
Exactly. Bond describes this poor warehouse manager standing on a concrete floor under harsh fluorescent lights, sitting idle on a forklift, staring at a completely empty receiving bay.
Because the procurement dashboard says the raw steel was purchased. The sales dashboard assumes the steel is already being stamped into components.
But the undeniable physics of the factory floor is that the truck hasn't arrived.
The end-to-end outcome has essentially become an orphan. Because management is fragmented, nobody actually owns the reality of the physical freight.
And this is where we have to interrogate the data architecture itself. Why is that warehouse manager staring at an empty bay when the C-suite dashboards are glowing green?
Because the digital pipeline has fundamentally fractured.
Right. The legacy ERP, the enterprise resource planning software, something ancient like an on-premise SAP instance from 2005, logged the raw steel as available inventory, the exact millisecond the financial purchase order cleared accounting.
It confused a financial transaction with a physical reality.
Precisely. The ERP thinks money changing hands is the same thing as steel arriving on a dock.
But the modern warehouse management software, the WMS, which operates on the actual physical floor and relies on real-time barcode scans, knows the truth.
It knows the barcode hasn't been scanned. It knows the truck is stuck in traffic on the highway.
The ERP and the WMS are living in two completely different realities. The data pipeline is broken.
I want to highlight the metaphor used to describe the corporate response to this because it is brilliant. When an executive team realizes their supply chain is chaotic, they rarely admit that their basic data plumbing is broken.
Oh, never. They try to out-tech the problem. They authorize a multi-million-dollar purchase of a state-of-the-art, cloud-native, predictive AI dashboard.
Because they think artificial intelligence is going to magically synthesize the chaos. It's the ultimate expression of technological hubris.
And the analogy in the text is that trying to fix the Pimpri-Chinchwad fracture with predictive AI is like trying to write brilliant firmware for a piece of hardware that has a physically cracked plastic switch.
Right. The software might be elegant, the machine learning might be peerless, but the physical defect, the fact that your fundamental databases aren't syncing in real time, sabotages the entire operation from the ground up.
We want to read articles about AI supply chains. But the sobering reality is that on a Friday afternoon at 4:30 in a factory in Pune, the supply chain isn't failing because of a lack of artificial intelligence.
No, it's failing because the procurement director and the warehouse manager are looking at two different Excel spreadsheets that have a 24-hour data latency between them.
We are failing at the absolute baseline level of functional clarity. We don't need more AI. We need the fundamental architecture, to be honest.
Let's carry this concept of static failure in a dynamic environment over to bottleneck for static network design. We already touched on the civic rigidity of PCMC, but looking at how the municipal government is attempting to solve the problem is incredibly revealing.
Because it mirrors exactly how corporations try to solve their internal problems.
Exactly. The civic bodies recognize that the network is failing. The 700% traffic increase is undeniable. So what is their response?
They execute massive, capital-intensive infrastructure patches. They're building the Pune Metro, a rapid transit system meant to pull commuters off the roads.
They've implemented the Rainbow BRTS, dedicating lanes for bus rapid transit, and they are planning 3 massive new ring roads to divert heavy industrial freight away from the city center.
And on paper, pouring billions into rapid transit and ring roads seems like the exact right move to decongest a hub.
But there is a fundamental flaw in this approach when viewed through the lens of modern supply chain dynamics.
Which is that these are static, concrete solutions applied to a problem of dynamic volatility.
Right. Adding a new ring road assumes that the fundamental flow of freight is going to remain centralized and linear, just like it was in 1970. It assumes trucks just need a wider pipe.
But modern logistics, driven by e-commerce and localized distribution, requires decentralized, agile routing. It requires a fluid network, not just a wider static artery.
You can build a pristine new elevated highway, but if the industrial flow remains stubbornly static, you haven't solved the bottleneck. You have merely relocated the traffic jam to a newer, more expensive intersection.
It is a profound lesson for supply chain design for our listeners.
Yeah.
You cannot fix a dynamically volatile problem purely with static concrete, whether that concrete is literal asphalt or rigidly coded legacy software.
Which perfectly sets up the final 2 failure points in the framework. Bottlenecks 6 and 7, overdependence on single routes and weak execution.
We see this constantly.
Yeah.
An organization relies entirely on the national highway to move its finished goods, or it relies entirely on a single Tier 1 supplier for a critical microchip.
It creates massive structural fragility, and when a disruption inevitably strikes, the organization lacks the execution capability at the operational level to pivot.
So a minor delay compounds into a catastrophic, expensive firefighting mission.
And this is the exact moment in the diagnostic process where we have to aggressively dismantle the black swan excuse.
Oh, definitely. Because if you ask a CEO why their production line halted, they will never say, because we relied on a single route and our execution was weak.
Never. They will point to the news. They will say, a container ship got stuck in the Suez Canal, or a port literally shut down due to a labor strike.
They claim these are force majeure events, acts of God that no supply chain could withstand. But wait, isn't a port closure a legitimate physical cause of a supply chain collapse?
It's the most pervasive myth in modern logistics, and it's the core thesis you must internalize from Bond's analysis. We love to blame macroeconomics because it completely absolves the C-suite of structural responsibility.
If it's a global crisis, it's not the CEO's fault.
Exactly. But the argument here is that the actual catastrophic failure is almost always an internal communications failure that is simply masquerading as a global logistics crisis.
Unpack that a bit. If a massive port in Shanghai closes, a ship physically cannot dock. The containers cannot be unloaded. That is a physical reality, not a communications failure.
The port closure is undeniably real, but the port closure is not the root cause of the internal organizational collapse. The port closure is merely the stress test.
It's the external pressure applied to your internal architecture.
Yes. Imagine a healthy, highly integrated supply chain system. It has diversified suppliers, it has dynamic routing capabilities, and most importantly, perfectly synchronized internal data.
So when the port closure hits, that healthy system instantly registers the data.
The WMS talks to the ERP in real time. The system calculates the exact latency of the delay. The COO immediately reroutes alternative shipments, adjusts manufacturing schedules, and manages customer expectations.
The delay is absorbed and mitigated. The system bends, but it doesn't break.
Exactly. But now apply that same port closure to a company suffering from the Pimpri-Chinchwad fracture. Procurement, sales, and warehousing are operating in data silos.
The port closes. The ERP doesn't register the delay because it only tracks financial invoices.
Sales continues to promise deliveries based on phantom inventory. Procurement is completely blind to the fact that their inbound freight is frozen.
It takes days, sometimes weeks, for the physical reality of the empty dock to catch up to the executive dashboard.
By the time they realize the materials are missing, the production line has starved. They are forced to shut down the factory and expedite emergency air freight at an exorbitant premium.
So the port didn't cause the organizational chaos. It merely exposed the data silos that were already there.
Precisely. The disease was already ravaging the body. The macroeconomic shock simply spiked the fever.
If your internal operational teams are spending their Friday afternoons locked in a conference room, screaming at each other over mismatched data fields in a spreadsheet instead of actively managing physical freight, you do not have a global logistics crisis.
You have a fundamental engineering and architectural problem.
That is a phenomenal paradigm shift. It forces accountability back inside the building.
It does.
So we have thoroughly diagnosed the disease. We have mapped the historical rigidity of PCMC. We have identified the Pimpri-Chinchwad fracture, the data silos, the static networks, and the myth of the macroeconomic excuse.
Now, we pivot to the solution phase of the curriculum.
This is where Dieter Rams walks back into the room. How do we take a philosophy birthed in the design of sleek, intuitive radios and apply it to cure the structural rot of industrial logistics?
We have to ruthlessly apply Rams's principle of less but better to both organizational behavior and software architecture.
Okay, let's start with the human element. Let's fix bottleneck 3, fragmented ownership, the silo problem.
Right. When a modern corporation identifies a communication silo between, say, procurement and sales, their instinct is almost universally maximalist.
They want to add things to fix things.
It's the reflex of bureaucracy. They say, we have a gap, let's hire a new vice president of cross-functional synergy. Let's establish a new oversight committee.
Let's mandate 3 new weekly alignment meetings where everyone presents a PowerPoint. They're adding layers, they're adding noise, they're adding design.
And Dieter Rams would look at that corporate response and identify it as terrible, obfuscating design. RAM's ethos dictates that to achieve functional clarity, you must strip away the non-essential.
You don't add managerial layers. You aggressively remove them.
The minimalist organizational redesign for a fractured supply chain is shockingly simple, but it's politically terrifying for most companies to implement.
So what is the redesign?
You appoint a single, uncompromising operations owner. This could be the COO or a newly empowered supply chain director. But the title doesn't matter. What matters is the functional authority.
Okay.
You grant the single individual explicit overriding veto power over both the procurement purchasing schedules and the sales forecasting promises.
Wow. You are stripping the autonomy away from the silos. That is a massive shift in executive power dynamics. Sales VPs do not like being told they can't close a deal.
Oh, they will hate it. But it is functionally necessary. You are creating a single, undeniable point of control. You are establishing a structural mandate that says you are solely accountable for the physical end-to-end outcome of this product.
From the moment the raw steel leaves the supplier's dock to the moment the finished component is signed for by the client, it forces reality into the boardroom.
Exactly. If the VP of sales attempts to promise an impossible expedited delivery to inflate their quarterly numbers, this single owner vetoes the contract.
Basing the decision entirely on the physical capacity of the system.
Right. And if the procurement director attempts to buy a year's worth of inventory to hit a cost reduction KPI, knowing it will physically clog the warehouse, this owner vetoes the purchase order.
It's the absolute minimum amount of organizational design necessary. Focus entirely on enforcing end-to-end accountability. Less bureaucracy, but vastly better control.
That's RAMs in action.
That minimalist approach makes perfect sense for human behavior within a company. But what about the digital architecture? How do we utilize RAM's philosophy to fix bottleneck 5, the limited visibility?
Where the legacy ERP swears the steel is available, but the WMS knows the floor is empty.
Exactly, because again, the corporate maximalist instinct here is to throw money and complexity at the problem.
The standard playbook is to authorize a massive IT transformation project. They hire a global consulting firm. They rip out the entire legacy ERP system, purchase a $10 million AI-driven suite from a new vendor, and embark on a brutal 3-year integration.
Which historically has an incredibly high failure rate.
It almost always fails, or at best, drastically underdelivers, because they are taking highly complex, unproven new software and layering it directly over fundamentally broken physical processes.
They're maximizing the bloat.
Right. So the minimalist solution, the Dieter Rams approach to software engineering, is what Prasad Bande identifies as the 48-hour actionable validation signal.
I love this concept. It is perhaps the ultimate expression of digital essentialism. Walk us through the exact mechanics of this. How do you fix a multi-million-dollar data fracture in 48 hours without ripping out the legacy systems?
Instead of a sprawling software overhaul, you execute a highly targeted data extraction. You don't look at the entire system. You go down to the warehouse floor and you pull the last 30 days of physical inventory logs directly from the WMS.
The logs, which represent undeniable physical reality. Barcode scans, forklift movements, the actual physics of the building.
Yes. Then you cross-reference that physical reality directly with the digital fantasy residing in the legacy ERP. You compare the WMS logs with the ERP's purchasing records.
You are hunting for one incredibly specific, microscopic piece of data.
You want to find the exact millisecond where the digital record in the ERP diverged from the physical reality on the concrete floor.
You are hunting for the exact moment the bone snapped on the X-ray.
Beautifully put, yes. You are looking for the exact moment the hallucination began. Perhaps it's a specific receiving protocol where the ERP assumes receipt upon port arrival, but the WMS requires a physical dock scan.
Once you identify that specific point of divergence, that anomaly becomes your sole engineering priority.
You ignore the AI dashboards. You ignore the shiny new software suites. You focus entirely on forcing a reconciliation at that exact point of failure.
And how do you force that reconciliation?
You engineer a minimalist API handshake.
Right, and for you listeners who might not be deep into systems architecture, an API, an application programming interface, is essentially a set of rules that allows two completely different pieces of software to communicate.
Exactly. And in Bond's framework, he provides the conceptual architecture for a simple Python script to execute this. It's a binary, unforgiving validation check.
The script sits between the legacy ERP and the active WMS.
And it forces the two systems to constantly synchronize their inventory status. But here is the critical essentialist constraint. It forces them to synchronize under a strict, unyielding threshold of 200 milliseconds.
200 milliseconds. That is aggressively fast for industrial legacy systems.
It has to be fast because the physical world is fast. If a forklift driver scans a pallet of steel and the latency for that information to update the legacy ERP exceeds 200 milliseconds, the Python script instantly flags it as a systemic failure.
It throws a critical error. It refuses to let the systems operate under the illusion of synchronization. So if it takes 201 milliseconds, the script says, the system is broken. Fix the latency.
Exactly. It forces the engineering team to confront the physical realities of their network. Why is there latency? Is it a database schema mismatch?
Or packet loss on a dusty Wi-Fi network in the warehouse.
Right. Is the legacy server throttling the connection? You are no longer arguing about abstract macroeconomic theories in the boardroom. You are fixing a 200 millisecond latency gap on the factory floor.
I see exactly why this is positioned as a masterclass curriculum for students and professionals. It takes this sprawling, chaotic crisis where executives are pointing fingers at the Suez Canal, and it brutally reduces it to a binary engineering priority.
100 millisecond API handshake. It is pure Dieter Rams.
It's as little design as possible, stripping away the bloat and focusing entirely on making the supply chain understandable and honest.
It restores human oversight by making the failure visible. It strips away the comforting illusion of AI competence. Good design is honest, and the API handshake forces the ERP to be honest about what is actually sitting on the concrete floor.
Okay, so we have diagnosed the present, and we have applied minimalist theory to solve it. What does this synthesis mean for the future?
If you are a logistics student mapping out a strategic framework, the core takeaway is this. You must train yourself to look past the macro noise.
Audit the internal database handshakes first.
Right. Interrogate the incentive structures of the department heads. You have to fix the fractured switch before you attempt to write the predictive firmware.
And regarding the future of PCMC itself, we spend a lot of time analyzing how physically constrained the MIDC infrastructure is. The rivers are choking, the roads are jammed.
So how does a massive industrial node like that actually grow when it is already bursting at its physical seams?
Yeah, how? Because the sources note that MIDC land rates in the region have absolutely skyrocketed. We're looking at market rates pushing 30,000 to 50,000 rupees per square meter.
It's prohibitively expensive to simply buy more land and build more sprawling factories. And they can't just build skyscrapers of manufacturing either.
Right. The regulatory environment prevents it. The Floor Space Index, or FSI, is strictly regulated by the municipal authorities. The base FSI is capped at 1:1.
Meaning, if you own 1,000 square meters of land, you are legally restricted to building a maximum of 1,000 square meters of floor space.
You can purchase some additional FSI with premiums, but fundamentally, space is finite.
You cannot indefinitely sprawl outward, and you can't build endlessly upward. So how does Pimpri-Chinchwad expand its economic output without expanding its physical footprint?
It has to evolve its fundamental design.
It must expand through simple, functional supply chain design. It can no longer rely purely on the brute force of heavy manufacturing.
The physical network can't sustain it.
And we are already seeing this necessary evolution playing out. The region is aggressively diversifying away from pure heavy metal logistics and pivoting into IT, advanced electronics, and lighter food processing.
The digital shift. Look at the Rajiv Gandhi Infotech Park in nearby Hinjawadi. It spans over 2,800 acres and houses over 800 IT companies.
It represents a massive paradigm shift from moving tons of raw steel to moving terabytes of code. It is a lighter, vastly more agile footprint.
But even a digital IT park has a massive physical footprint. You still have hundreds of thousands of commuters, you need massive cooling for servers, you still need water.
And that is precisely where the concept of restorative engineering must become the dominant planning philosophy.
Dieter Rams' 9th principle.
Right, that good design is environmentally friendly. It conserves resources and minimizes pollution. Future expansion in PCMC cannot just be a blind mandate to lay more asphalt.
It has to be ruthlessly focused on addressing the ecological deficit that the static era created, like the 290 million liters of sewage.
Yes. You cannot add 100 new IT companies to the grid until you apply functional clarity to the civic infrastructure. You have to upgrade those municipal sewage treatment plants to handle the full load.
And you have to engineer systems to aggressively remove the water hyacinth from the Pavnar River to restore natural water flow.
It's the exact same minimalist philosophy, just applied at a municipal scale. You are demanding a functional API handshake between the economic growth of the city and its actual ecological capacity.
Precisely. If a municipal planner just zones more land without fixing the water treatment deficit, they are acting exactly like the C-suite executive who buys an AI dashboard without fixing the fractured ERP system.
They are maximizing bloat and ignoring the core function. Sustainable growth requires balancing ambition with reality. Less unconstrained sprawl, but better, highly integrated growth.
Let's synthesize this entire journey for you. We started by examining the incredible historical rise of Pimpri-Chinchwad, catalyzed by that single antibiotic factory in 1954.
And we observed how that static physical architecture is currently buckling under the dynamic pressure of modern traffic and population booms.
We used that physical landscape to diagnose the hidden bottlenecks, zeroing in on the Pimpri-Chinchwad fracture.
Where procurement buys on obsolete data, sales promises the moon, and the warehouse manager is paralyzed because the ERP and WMS are hallucinating different realities.
And ultimately, we deployed DataRAMs to redesign those failures, stripping away managerial bloat for a single operations owner.
And bypassing the allure of expensive AI for a minimalist 200-millisecond API handshake.
It has been a masterclass in seeing through the noise. But before we close out this deep dive, I know you always have one final provocative thread to pull on. What is the lingering concept you want to leave burning in the minds of our listeners today?
It is this: we live in a highly digitized era where we have culturally conditioned ourselves to view data as something ethereal.
We talk about it existing in the cloud.
We treat it as if it is completely detached from the dirt and the noise of reality. But as we have explored on the concrete floors of Pimpri-Chinchwad, data is not ethereal. Data possesses profound physical gravity.
A single broken line of code in an ERP system literally abandons tons of raw steel on a wooden pallet to rust.
It strands a heavy freight truck on a congested highway. It forces a human being sitting on a forklift to absorb the chaotic shockwaves of an executive's miscalculation.
So as you step back into your roles and design the supply chains of tomorrow,
I want you to look critically at your dashboards and ask yourself one uncompromising question. Is your digital architecture actually speaking honestly to the physics of the real world, or have you spent millions of dollars just to optimize a very pretty illusion?
data possesses physical gravity. You can look at the glowing screen all you want, but if you refuse to acknowledge the actual physical fracture in the system, you are optimizing an illusion. Keep looking for those invisible fractures, strip away the non-essential, and demand clarity.